I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of the Crown and Tide trilogy, no other than Mr. Michael Roberti. Can you please introduce yourself?
Okay, hey guys, I'm Michael Roberti. I'm the author of the Traitors We Are. I've been a writer for, on and off probably my whole life. I used to do a little bit more with poetry. I'm a teacher, I'm a dad, and, it's just kind of been an interesting ride with publishing.
Yes, and welcome to Book 101 Review, Mr. Michael. So, are you an independent publishing or traditional?
Independent. I decided to go self-pub after I queried for a little bit, just didn't really like the experience. I didn't do it for very long, like about a month or two, and just kind of decided to do my own thing with it.
So, what do you think are the pros and cons of indie publishing?
That's a good question. So I think a couple things I would say from what I've seen from both traditional and independent authors is that with independent authorship and self pub, you get to keep your own rights. The royalties are better. You can tell a story you want to tell without a whole lot of oversight. And there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with that. There's a good community. Traditional, I think there are some pros there as well. You have a little bit more backing financially. I've had to do this myself, and I've kept it relatively cheap because as an educator, as my primary profession, I don't get a ton of money coming in for things like this. But publishers, they might have paid for my cover art, or might have paid for editing or things like that. Conversely, there are cons to both as well. I think one of the problems with trad pub is unless you get a really good sweetheart deal with a top 4 or 5 publisher, you may get somewhat of an advance, but it's you have to earn out. Royalties aren't as good. You don't own your own work. There may be major changes to your story. I've heard horror stories, though nothing personal that I've seen, like to people I know, but of people getting dropped by their publisher really quickly and early on after they didn't earn or meet expectations. And I also know several people who have been agented for quite some time and haven't had a book sell. And I mean, I've seen that multiple times. On the other end of the spectrum, with self pub, you have to fight the stigma of maybe this work isn't as good, or maybe this person failed as a writer, which I don't think that's necessarily true. Plus, you have the upfront costs and things of that nature, and there's no real assistance when it comes to marketing. You basically have to do it yourself.
How do you market your Traitors We Are?
It's been interesting. I mainly I just talk to people, and on Twitter or Instagram, or I'll if there's like an independent, like an indie author sale, I'll try to hop on one of those, or I'll get on podcasts or things of that nature, and try to just talk about it when I can. And I think I've been fairly successful with it. I know there are other people out there doing way better than me. I know there's some other people out there struggling even more than I struggle. But basically just having conversations and kind of hoping word of mouth will take off as people read it. Hopefully people give me some honest reviews, and the reviews are hopefully the reviews are good. And just kind of see what happens.
As your debut novel, what do you learn from it?
I think one of the biggest things I learned is pacing and how to streamline my process. I haven't had as much time this year to write, but I've got the prequel, which is a novella, and the sequel, which is full length, coming out this year. Neither is done, but I'm very confident in my release dates, because I only have a couple thousand more words for the prequel. The sequel, I'm about 2/3 of the way done, and I have as a teacher, I get summers off. But I think when I first started, I was able to just sit down and just focus and do that. But part of the problem I had with that too is there was a little bit less planning involved, so there are some things I've had to figure out as things went on. But with this one, it's definitely, I feel like the planning has panned out a little bit more.
That'd be awesome, Mr. Michael. So, do you think what are your struggles in writing Traitors We Are?
I would say the biggest one for me, and I mean, I think it still continues to be for me and a lot of other people I know, is the imposter syndrome of, I still tell myself, I still wake up feeling like the book's not very good, or like I didn't accomplish all I wanted to. And, it's sometimes like, I have to take a step back, and just get back to the writing process. The other thing I'd say is I think, one of the things that you have to do as a writer is try to accentuate your strengths and minimize your things that you're not quite as good at. One of my things I don't think I'm quite as good at is I'm not as great of a descriptive writer. A lot of times I like to get to the meat of the story or the conversation or the action, and I can forget to add more detail in. And so like that was something that basically I'd finish writing the book, go back, add more detail, revise that. There's one room in one of the chapters that I feel like I revised it probably like 10 to 15 times just because I couldn't quite nail it down until like the very last little bit. And I think it got there, but I mean, it's a work in progress.
Yes, definitely. So, the Traitors We Are, how you crafted it.
Like as far as the story itself.
Yes.
So this is a story that's kind of been living in my head for like about 8 years. But I had this idea, and I wouldn't call it a Dungeons and Dragons book, but I play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, and I set it in this world, and I had this idea about this area of this fictional world that is oppressed by this government, and how their interactions might be shaped by their proximity to each other as well as their cultural differences. And then later on, I had the idea, not necessarily for the story, but for the world in general, that when somebody dies in this world, everything they've ever written down disappears. So, that flavors things like, people will carry around scraps of paper with their loved ones' names on it. Or, if you want somebody, if somebody signed a contract that really puts you in a bind, you can have something happen to them, and then that signature fades or whatever. And then that really, I think, kind of put the story to life. It gave it a little bit more teeth. Was like, what happens when, in the case of the Traitors We Are, there's this war happening between these two parts of the same country. One's a religious and ethnic minority, and the other one is much more rich and prosperous. But like, what happens when they collide, and what happens to the people on both sides of that? And that's kind of what I try to capture.
Yes, the Traitors We Are. What behind the title of your novel?
Well, that's kind of funny. This was originally going to be a standalone, and I had a different title for it. But as I started writing it, the characters kind of shaped it a little bit more than I expected. And in particular, one character, towards about the halfway or the third point of the book, there are some major revelations from two characters who in chapter one are described as dead, and they are dead. But um, the um, the narrative shifts and goes back to like a little bit before the book started, and shows what happened to those two characters and how they were betrayed. And then there's a few other betrayals, especially in the later half of the book, where and I think one character mentions at the very last chapter that we're all traitors in our own way, whether we know it or not. We all betray either who we are or what we stand for, or what have you.
Very well said, Mr. Michael. So, let's talk about the character of your novel. What can you say about it?
Okay, so it takes place with three major viewpoints. You've got Kale Oberlin and Marilee Oberlin. They're the father, or sorry, they're the children of Orden Oberlin, who is the chief of most of the area called the Aragon Reach. And Kale is on the front lines of the fight. The book starts with him, mourning the death of his best friend, who's engaged to his sister Marilee, who's another major point of view character, and kind of evolves from there to Emil, who is the nephew of the king, and he actually killed their brother not too long before that. And it's kind of about those three and how those three kind of in and out of each other's lives, as well as how some side characters will eventually become important as well. Like there's a character who I think is introduced in chapter 5, Freya Andersey, who takes a pretty good focus in the last half of the book and becomes really important in book 2. and then Eric Temin, who shows up in chapter 2 and was actually supposed to die in chapter 4, but then ends up becoming a pretty major character as well.
Very well said, Mr. Michael. So, before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening in the United States, especially in California. These are the places that are listening to me, of course, in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Mountain View, San Jose, Moreno Valley, Sacramento, Southgate, Riverside, Santa Ana, Sunnyvale, San Diego, Oakland, Fontana, Thousand Oaks, Westminster, North Hollywood, Burlingame, Anaheim, Pleasant Hill, South San Francisco, Oakland, Resenda, Long Beach, Coarse Gold, Chula Vista. I have 110 places and I thank you so much for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world like Mr. Michael Roberti. Talk about the negative and positive review of your book. It says, according to Lahariel, a solid green mark fantasy story with an interesting twist. So, what are the twists that you put in the story to make Miss or Mr. Lariel make this comment?
I think that the big part is that part in the middle of the book where you find out that two people who had died, the circumstances of their death were not what you expected. There is another one where one of my favorite things that somebody told me about it is that you can tell that it's gonna. I think it's one of the reviews say it too. Is there's a chapter later on where you can tell exactly what's gonna happen, but you don't want it to happen so badly that you almost fool yourself into believing that something else can happen. But instead, the worst, of course, happens. So I think there's a lot of character death, but there's also there's also twists like people who become friends you would not expect to forge friendships. As well as who actually is the villain. Maybe that's kind of up for debate depending on how you look at your antagonists. But I think that's probably what she was referring to.
Definitely. It says a solid debut, according to George. And how did you make this novel as an epic?
Okay. I think it's the scale. And Jordan is a really well-known reviewer. I really like that's somebody I really respected, and I was very nervous about him reading my book. But I was thrilled with his review. I think the epic is maybe the fact that there's this war going on. There's a lot of background noise about maybe dark goddess specifically in the prologue and the epilogue. And I think I would say even though there's a little bit of a sweeping epicness to it, it really comes down to being about the people who are impacted and how they react to their circumstances.
Yes, according to Jared Green, an interesting introduction to the interesting series.
Yeah, that was really I've been really thrilled with the response I've gotten. When I first hit publish, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I thought it was entirely possible that I get very few sales, or that I kind of expected to hover more towards the 3 stars in the reviews, but I've been thrilled to pieces with how people have been enjoying it.
So let's go to let's say top critical review, and according to Miss Jessica Goken, says an okay story but did not hold my interest. So how did you comment on that?
I really try not to. I mean, I do read my reviews. I believe that if we're not getting better, we're getting worse. And that's one of those things where I did do some searching in the narrative and kind of see. I think my guess would be I do know that some people have said it starts a little bit slow, which I'm kind of okay with. Because I feel like I set the pieces that I needed to set there, and maybe I could set it up a little bit faster in the future. Which I'm trying to work on that when it comes to the prequel and the sequel. And the other thing too is, and this is what I always tell people who get bummed out by negative reviews is, a book everyone likes is a book no one can love. And the thing is, not everybody's going to love your work. Not everybody's going to find something in it that they respond to. There's some really great authors that I don't respond to. and that's not their fault, and it's not really even my fault. It's just the circumstances of the thing.
Definitely. You cannot please everybody. So, what do you think negative reviews make you perfect in the future or in the process?
I think the things I think I would like to, if I could take back and start again. I think that maybe in the first part I would have had more, especially since I've heard a few people say like it was a strength, was add more battle scenes, maybe a little bit more action. Um, a lot of people seem to really like the second part. I don't know that I messed too much with that. The other thing too is, I always kind of think like, anytime I do something that like, how could it be better? There's some stuff that I'm going to be adding in the second book that I kind of wish could have, and I kind of alluded to some of the stuff in the first book, but I kind of wish that maybe I had started a little bit earlier with some of the foreshadowing. But I think a lot of the foreshadowing that's there is really gonna surprise people at the end of book two.
Yes, sounds interesting. So, book two, is
Mhm.
that the sequel or the prequel?
So actually, I've got both coming. The book two is, well, what I refer to as book two is A Grave for Us All, which is kind of the fallout of the events of book one. It takes place a few months later, and there's been kind of a stalemate as far as the progression of the story. That gets broken by a character who's very driven to get there, what they want. The prequel, I've been, so that's something that I've seen a lot of indie authors say is a idea is to basically write like a quick, novella length prequel, and then release it for free to get people interested in the story. And for the people who've already read the book, there are a couple of characters that people really liked that didn't get a lot of screen time, specifically Darius and Lorson, who are mentioned as being dead in chapter one, who get that interlude chapters to themselves where you find out what really happened to them. But people seem to really respond to them, and then also to get a little bit more of that action, to kind of give a little bit more context to who are these people and why do they feel the way they do at the beginning of chapter one, which is ostensibly pretty close to the end of the war. And then the second book focuses more on, well, the war is over, but is it really, like, what was the cost of peace, and how do we actually even know that we have what we have is peace?
Yes, interesting to read, Mr. Michael. And according to S.S. Frankowska,
Mhm.
as I said, great read, drama and politics driven plot with a wide cast of well developed characters and fantastic world building throughout the pages. So, if you describe the world that you build in, how fantastic it is.
See, that's an interesting, because I've gotten that a couple times, and to be honest, I'm kind of the world building idea of that you really want to take what we have or what and then just change one or two things about it. So really, the main thing that's different between our world and theirs is that that things that get written down um, disappear when somebody dies. But you might say, okay, well, that's interesting, but what does it really do? And then it really colors everything. Because think about, and this is one of the ways I thought about it. The Library of Alexandria. What did we lose when that burnt down? They found a Greek ship, I've heard one time, that had some technology on it that people were like, well, wait, the Greeks didn't have this technology, so where did this come from? And it turned out they did, but it got lost when that ship sunk. And then just imagine that anytime somebody passes away, it's like a mini burning of the Library of Alexandria. You know what I mean? So that's a big part of it. And then so like there's gonna be more to it when it comes up. And this might be kind of spoilery, but like one thing that always gets asked is, well, why haven't they invented the printing press? So I mean, one reason might be that they did and it keeps getting lost, or maybe there are people who don't want them to invent the printing press. Maybe people like the idea. Words have to be consistently scribbled down by different people and rescribed and rewritten every so often. And then as well as like in chapter 3, Marilee gets a letter, and the very first letter that she gets is blank, and she can't figure out who it's from because on her signatures that she keeps, two of the names have disappeared, which are Lorson and Darius. So it's either from Lorson or Darius, but she's not sure which. And so that's a big part of it. There's a little bit of magic, and that gets hinted at in the later part of the book with Kale. He's working with his fencing instructor, Zora of Goal, who comes from a land called Sorheim, which is that is very different from our our world. I haven't described it too much, but there's like really horrific beasts. Everybody who is from there has an innate connection to a very primal evil magic that gets hinted at, especially in the epilogue when we hear from Zora's father, Zopa. I think there, if you count epilogue, prologues, and the intermission chapters, 30 maybe. I know it's like somewhere north of 25.
So for those chapters, which chapter having this difficulty of writing with?
The one that I had the most difficulty of writing. I think they were all different in their own unique ways. I'd say that chapter 1 might have been it because I probably went over that the most times. And then, after getting some response from, I had a little bit of trouble getting beta readers because like I was not involved in the writing community at all. I just wanted to write a book. I didn't really think too much about it. And I mean, I'm kind of impulsive, I guess, but my wife and a couple other people said that the first chapter was a little bit too long. So, for instance, most chapters in my book are about 4,000 words. Some are a little bit longer than that. Chapter 1 at one point was well over 6,000, and I was like, well, okay, let me cut out about 2,000 words or more and add a little bit more action to it. And I think I made it a stronger chapter. I don't really 100% remember what those 2,000 words were, but I think it was just kind of like introspection, and maybe that wasn't necessary. So I think I probably went over that the most, and I think it got easier as I went with writing.
Yes, very well said. So which chapter fun writing with?
The one I probably had the most fun writing was Feminine Wiles, which is a Freya Andersey point of view chapter, and I think it's her only point of view chapter. Maybe she had two. But that was a chapter I didn't expect to go the way it did at all. It was the war is over. They're in the capital. The Reachmen are in the capital, meeting with the king, and so. I don't want to spoil too much about that, but just the chemistry that she had with this other character, I did not expect at all. That was not my plan. I expected it to be funny for a different reason, but really, like the banter back and forth. And how their friendship kind of grew from that was a lot of fun to write and just kind of got me swept up in it.
Yes. So before we go on, Mr. Michael, I just want to invite you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our third season. We have Alessandro, one of the executive chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. Plus, they listen to my latest episode with Miss Ali Wing, CEO of Ubli. Ubli is breakthrough that we need to know and to spread all over the world to help us eradicate obesity and diabetes. So please do check Food 101. So, Mr. Michael, who are your favorite authors?
Favorite authors, I'll split it with do indie and trad. Indie, I gotta say Andrew D. Meredith is doing absolute crazy work right now. Some of the books he's put out have been just absolutely, like, the amount of like world building and feeling that is put into them just really takes me away. Like I listen to them when I'm doing my commute through audiobooks, and he is also the audiobook narrator. The work's fantastic, and I mean it's one of those types of writing. It's a type of writing where it actually inspires you to want to write better. He is doing absolute fantastic work. I also want to shout out JCM Byrne and his Wistful Ascending and the Hybrid Helix series. He did something that I just like. When I first heard about it, I was like, okay, that's an interesting idea, and it's kind of like a superhero in space type thing, which didn't seem like it'd be my cup of tea, but that was my favorite book I read last year. It just engrossed me. The characterization, the humor, and he's a fantastic guy. And last on that list would be Crystal Matar. Legacy of Brightwash was a book I wasn't sure what to expect from, and probably my number 2 or number 3 indie book. She's got Legacy of Brick and Bone coming out in, I think it's this month, but she that book, that book lives rent free in my head. It's something that like the the prose, the characters, the way it all comes together. There's just something really horribly beautiful about it. And then traditional authors, probably my favorites are Sir Kazuo Ishiguro, right, author of Never Let Me Go and Remains of the Day. Kurt Vonnegut Jr., Slaughterhouse-Five, and Cat's Cradle. And then fantasy one in there. I like Joe Abercrombie a lot. I think his work really has evolved over the last several books, and he really has I mean, like the first trilogy was good, but like the standalones, the second trilogy, it's really coming into its own.
So if we connect them all, or if you describe them in one word, what is it?
I would say feeling. I think that's the biggest part about what it is to write and why people like books is they want to feel something and be kind of taken away.
So is it feeling is to your writing?
I try. That would definitely be a big part of why I do what I do.
Yes, so definitely. What are adjectives that you can say to your first debut novel?
Okay. Well, I think to set the tone is a big thing. This is my debut novel and my debut series, but my plans go beyond that. So I want to set the tone for the world and to set the tone for my work. Another one is, I mean, that people will enjoy it, and I think I like to tell stories. I always have, and I feel like that's been going pretty good. And then one that's kind of come up that I've been a little bit surprised about. I'm a high school English teacher, so literacy and reading is really important to me. But I had a review that said I don't like reading, but I like this book, or I really enjoyed reading this, even though I'm not a big reader, and that meant a lot to me as somebody who tries to get kids to read basically every day, and sometimes doesn't do so good with it. That meant a lot.
Definitely. If you inspired people to read, that's something in your writing. So if you describe your writing, what is it?
Let me think. I don't know that. I guess that this would probably be so. I took creative writing poetry in college, and even though the Traitors We Are is not poetry, my best writing feedback that I got was from my professor, and honestly, it's something I strive for even in this is that tell the truth until it hurts, and that she said that was what she liked about my writing was that I told the truth until it hurts. In fact, sometimes you have to seek that out a little bit, and it might not always be the most comfortable thing, but sometimes for me, like reading The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and I know some people don't love that book, but that ending rocked me and shook me to my core, horrifying and beautiful. And I was probably 21, and I wasn't as sensitive as I am now. I'm 36 and I've got 2 kids, but back then I had no kids, and I still remember just staring up at my ceiling and then having to walk out of my apartment and just stand outside for a little bit.
So what are the difference of writing poetry and writing a novel?
Well, I would say probably, I don't know that I'm a very good poet, to be honest. I don't really pay attention to rhyme or form. I just kind of throw things out there. I would say that the similarities are, trying to sometimes, and I mean, I'm not really one of those authors that really cares a whole lot about the beauty of my prose, but I like to have beautiful phrasing here and there. And I think that's a big part of poetry too, is having something where you throw it out there and somebody just kind of it's almost like the breath leaves their lungs. And that's, if I can get that moment, I don't know that I have, but if I can get that moment, that's fantastic.
Yes, indeed. So what are your long-term or short-term goal in writing?
So goals, I want to release these 2 books this year. I want to release another 2 books next year. The final, book of the Crown and Tide series, Until Worms Remain, which As We Are and ends with. Then I've got a rewrite of a book, the first book I ever wrote that I didn't try to publish or do anything with. I completely reimagined it. I'm calling it The Unclaimed Girl, and that will be, I don't know how many books that will be necessarily. I'm thinking at least 3, but I'm expecting that to be more like young adult dark fantasy compared to the high political intrigue Traitors We Are. I described it one time to somebody as The Witcher meets Wandaverse with teenagers, which I think will be really neat. My main goal is that I would like to have 2 or more books written per year, basically, for the immediate future until I can retire from teaching.
So writing is your only hobby right now?
Well, yeah, just mostly because I have no other time. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a ton of time for writing right now either. So I'm kind of stealing time when I can. I've got 2 kids who I love to spend time with. I've got a wife I love. I do driver's ed in addition to teaching. Me and my son do karate together. It's a busy life, but making it work.
Yes, definitely. So, according to Mary Grace, intrigue and betrayal.
I think that to me that's one of the reasons I like like I remember the first time I ever saw the Game of Thrones season 1, really liking it. And I didn't want to model it after my book after that, but I did want there to be something maybe similar to it in there, or I think that's a pretty big key to at least the series.
So, what part of Game of Thrones do you like best?
Me and my wife stopped watching it after I forget which season, but it was after they got ahead of where the George R. R. Martin wrote. I think that in the early seasons, what they really captured well is that sense of anything could happen at any moment, and you may not have seen it coming, but if you had paid close enough attention, maybe you would. For instance, probably one of the parts that actually I definitely modeled it after this, but with Ned Stark's death in season 1, spoiler, for anybody who hasn't seen it, I think everybody, including me, even though the show had not up to that point had allowed us to believe that he was going to live, we all believed he was going to live because he's the main character. But
Yes.
same thing with one of the characters who dies in my book is everybody's kind of like, surely he's not going to do that, and that's but that it made the most sense, and it was the right thing to do in my opinion.
So you did not watch the whole the last season.
No, I have a rough idea of what happened from what I've been told. I want to say the season that we last saw had the sand snakes in it. And it was when, in my opinion, they stopped punishing characters for like this is one of the things that really bothered me about the last few episodes I saw is it went from a show that was about the winners outsmarted everybody, the people who weren't smart enough or weren't quick enough, got what was coming to them, and then people started surviving things that they shouldn't survive.
So do you think the flaws of Game of Thrones is that?
I mean, in my opinion, it's that, and then I think it suffered from its own success a little bit. I mean, it's better than anything I've got going on. Obviously, people like it a lot more, but I think that it started having to become bigger and more than what it was. And I think that's a trap that a lot of franchises fall into is that they get away from what initially drew people to them.
Yes. So the Traitors we are is it good for a series or a motion picture?
I would, if I was going to do one, I would definitely do a series. There's a lot of stuff that we could do with it if I ever got that option. A lot of stuff happening in the background. Like if you look at, I think a good example of this is Shadow and Bone on Netflix. That they end with the Shadow and Bone series and kind of expanded upon that. I guess stuff you can do with that. Well, there is one through line with that stories and this is what I kind of tell people. They're like, oh well, it's about this. Oh well, it's about that. Single event or 2 single events that the whole story is about, and neither one of them have happened yet.
Please invite our listeners to buy your book.
Hey listeners, my book, The Traitors We Are, is on sale on Amazon.com and Google Michael Roberti book or The Traitors We Are book. It should show up. And me up on Twitter. I'm Mike S. Roberti. Happy to hear from you guys. If you like the book, let me know. If you don't like it, let me know. I can take it.
Maricon people, see you soon.